So just to give a brief introduction to myself, I'm Nick from the Red Ant Collective. The Red Ant Collective is a organization formed last year in Australia on the basis of anti-imperialism, socialism, and revolutionary Marxism. It's my pleasure to welcome everybody that's here to the forum, Palestine and the War on Gaza, what role for the international solidarity movement? I'm sure comrades will have seen that in some of the promotional material, a lot of poignant questions were put forward in the context of organizing this forum. Questions such as, as the war intensifies against Gaza, so do protests, especially in the imperialist countries. So what is happening on the ground in Gaza and Palestine? What are the protests demanding? And what should they be demanding of Israel and the governments that fund it? How can international support for Palestine grow? Where does the global South stand? How can solidarity grow, in particular in the imperialist countries such as Australia and also the United States and Europe? So to begin answering these crucial questions, we're joined by three very exciting guest speakers who I'll begin to introduce. But before I do so, I'm just going to go over very quickly, because no one wants to listen to me, go over the structure for today and some housekeeping. So the structure for the forum today is 15 to 20 minutes for each of the three speakers, and this will be followed by a Q&A session. And for the Q&A session, that will be via the chat function. So if comrades want to put in their questions into the chat function, you can also say if it's for the whole forum or for a specific speaker. If you'd like, you can also say where you're asking the question from. And also throughout today's session, I'll be dropping some links as well to get involved in the solidarity movement in Australia, and also if anybody in today's meeting would like to get in contact with the organisers of today's event. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our first speaker, Arwa Hashhash, who is from the Palestinian People's Party and who is responsible for the Youth International Relations. Arwa is also a co-founder of a new project called The Besieged Truth, which aims at exposing the crimes of the occupation and strengthening the Palestinian narrative. So if I could just hand straight over to Arwa.
Hi again, everyone. First, I would like to thank the comrades in the Red Ant Collective for organizing this important seminar, which actually comes in the midst of a genocidal escalation against the Palestinian people. Actually, the issue of international solidarity is of utmost importance today, and any activity in this context is highly appreciated, including seminars of this kind, as they provide actually the opportunity to convey the reality in Palestine, and also to counter the lies of the Israeli and Western media outlets. Actually, I have been asked to talk about the current situation in Palestine, and especially in Gaza Strip, as well as the current and strategic demands of the Palestinian people. But in fact, discussing the current situation, which is from October 7th until today, without addressing the political context in which this situation has arisen, can lead to incomplete analysis. So I believe today many people have become more aware of the roots of the Palestinian cause and some of its center milestones, especially the Nakba, which is the ethnic cleansing operation carried out by the Zionist movement against the Palestinian in 1948. where as a result, the state of Israel was established on the Palestinian land after the expulsion of the vast majority of the Palestinians in that time and the execution of hundreds of massacres against them. I also believe that there is an increasing awareness that the Palestinian-Israel conflict is not a conflict between two equal parties. It's a conflict between an occupier and people under occupation, and that the Palestinian cause is a matter of national liberation. Also, there is increasing awareness that this conflict is a long-standing one that extends for more than 75 years and even up to 100 years if we return to the roots, including the Balfour Declaration and the role, the central role actually that the British imperialism played in that time. And also that this conflict is not tied to isolated events here and there, such as the event of October 7th, which is actually the operation of Al-Aqsa flood that carried out by Palestinian resistance factions, including Hamas, as Israel and America and some Western countries trying to portray it in the media. Of course, understanding the historical and political context in comprehensive and holistic manner requires delving into key milestones in this long history of the Palestinian cause. And of course, by the limited time in this seminar doesn't allow this. So I would like today only to discuss two fundamental issues for understanding the context in which Al-Aqsa flood operation took place and the aggression that Israel is currently launching against the Palestinian people. The first issue is the recent Israeli government, and the second is the recent normalization agreements with Israel, and how these two issues actually intensifying the blockade of a solution or a political horizon for the Palestinian cause, and also have on the ground repercussions on the lives and the fate of the Palestinians. On December 29th last year, a new Israeli government took power in the occupying state. It was this government, it was formed from a coalition of 6 far-right parties between religious parties and settler parties. This government was established through a coalition agreement whose essence revolves around a unified view regarding the indigenous inhabitants, I mean the Palestinians, and the only possible solutions with these people, with the Palestinian. This view was expressed by the current Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, one day before taking the oath before the Knesset. Netanyahu announced that his new government would work based on several orientations, including prominently that the Jewish people have exclusive and non-transferable right throughout the land of Israel, where the government encourages the expansion of Jewish presence all over the land of Israel, in Jalil, in Negev, Golan, and Judea and Samaria. And when Netanyahu talks about the entire land of Israel, it also includes Judea and Samaria, meaning the West Bank and Gaza Strip, the lands where the Palestinian state is supposed to be established according to the international legitimacy and even according to the Oslo Accords that Israel itself signed but never committed to. This government has expressed its orientation more clearly through its extremist ministers, the Minister of Finance, Smotrich, and the Minister of National Security, Ben Gvir. And by the way, both of them live in settlements in West Bank, and they present themselves as representative of the settlers in West Bank and East Jerusalem. These two ministers adopt very extreme positions regarding the issue of settlements, and they haven't stopped actually expressing their intention to annex Area C, which the area that constitute more than 60% of the West Bank area. In addition, they keep announcing their plan to increase the arming of settlers in West Bank by at least 9,000 settlers per month, which will raise the number of armed settlers from 200,000 to 800,000 in a few years, actually. This assumption, the assumption of this government actually naturally had on-ground repercussions on the fate of the Palestinian people. And due to lack of time, I limited to the following issues, actually 3 categories. First is intensifying settlement in an unprecedented manner and issuing orders to begin building tens of thousands of housing units for settlers in the West Bank. And in this regard, actually, this coalition announcing a plan to expand the settler presence, including a plan to expand the settlers' presence in the northern West Bank from 170,000 settlers to 1 million by 2015. The other impact on the ground actually is intensification of the racist laws and procedures against Palestinians and incitement rhetoric against them. I will only mention few examples of these laws. One of examples, actually, legislation of a law allowing the execution of Palestinian prisoners accused of having intention to carry any kind of resistance against the Israelis. Another law is, and see the contradiction between these 2 laws, preventing the confiscation of weapons and investigation of settlers who open fire on the Palestinians. Another law is forbidding Palestinian national celebration in East Jerusalem and criminalizing the raising of the Palestinian flag. And lastly, I would like to mention the law of freezing the already limited budget allocated for Jerusalem and Arab towns in Israel. These only few examples of tens of racist laws that the current Israeli governments approved against Palestinians, actually. And the third on-ground impact of this government is intensification of attacks against Palestinian by the occupying the Israeli state, actually, and by its citizens, I mean the settlers. These attacks against different forms, including cold blood killing of tens of Palestinians by the Israeli army, escalation of daily attacks by settlers against Palestinians and their homes, their properties, lands, and agriculture groups. And this happened always under full protection of the Israeli army. Escalation campaigns to demolish the Palestinian homes, especially in East Jerusalem, and also increase in the frequency of arrests, often combined by instances of abuse, humiliation, and physical violence against detainees. Also, there is an increase or intensification of cases of administrative detention, which is the arrest or detention without any formal charge. Also, there is an increase in assaults on Palestinian prisoners in Israeli prisons. This involving beating and isolation and deprivation of basic rights for the prisoners, including denial of family visits and phone calls. And the last thing that I want to mention in this regard is the intensification of attacks on holy sites, especially in Jerusalem, with near daily storms by settlers into Al-Aqsa Mosque under the protection of the Israeli army. This deliberate escalation against the Palestinian people, which comes with clear and explicit directives from its ministers, is also combined by actually Israel's fervent pursuit of normalizing Israeli relations with the Arab countries. And Israel, in its pursuit, has been keen to ensure as many peace agreements as possible with the Arab countries by passing actually the Arab Peace Initiative proposed by Saudi Arabia in 2010. This initiative that links comprehensive peace and full normalization between Arab League member states and Israel to the condition of Israel withdrawal from the Arab territories occupied in 1967. And unfortunately, Israel indeed succeeded in achieving a series of normalization agreements, the normalization agreements known as the Abraham Accords. But the most important than these Abraham Accords is the historic agreement as described by the Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, which was eagerly awaited with Saudi Arabia. And it is considered because Saudi Arabia is considered as a leader of the Islamic and the Arab world. So Israel considered that peace with Saudi Arabia is one that can ensure and encourage the other Arab countries to make similar agreements. And as Netanyahu expressed, this peace is capable of ending the Arab-Israeli conflict and will ultimately lead to a solution of Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And when Netanyahu talks about a solution with Palestinians, he doesn't mean peace with Palestinians. On the contrary, he means that these peace agreements with Arab countries are what will force the Palestinian to accept the imposed reality set by Israel. This is explicitly expressed by the recent Israeli government of annexing the West Bank and managing the Gaza Strip, even if that means displacing the Palestinians there, which is actually clearly obvious in the recent aggression against Gaza Strip. In view of this intensification of daily attacks on the Palestinian people and the attempt to impose reality on the ground by annexing the West Bank and also attempt at normalization and the state blockade of the political horizon and the attempt also to eliminate the right of the Palestinian people, the intensification of state of Palestinian resistance is the natural responses for all of this. So only in this context we can understand the October 7th operation, the Al-Aqsa Float operation, as part of the intensification of the Palestinian resistance, and that the criminal aggression taking place now in Gaza is a continuation of the Israeli aggression against the Palestinian people, which was intensified by the last Israeli government and is also a continuation of successive Israeli governments since the founding of the State of Israel. Here also it is important to remember that Gaza Strip has been under siege for more than 16 years. And during this 16 years, actually, Israel carried out 6 bloody wars in Gaza. So I wanted just to make this context to understand the operation that the Palestinian factions and the including Hamas in October 7th, and to say that this operation didn't come from vacuum. There is a context for this operation. And now I just want to speak a little bit about the current situation in Palestine, especially in Gaza. So actually, the true expression of what is happening in Gaza now is a genocide. There has been a continuous shelling for over a month, and daily massacres actually committed by Israel against the Palestinian people. Last massacre was just few hours ago. The Israel shelled a Palestinian camp, and tens of people have been killed in that shelling. And Israel keep committing massacres every day, by bombing schools, bakeries, hospitals, and populated homes, and even shelters for the displaced people. Even when the people are displaced to mosques and churches, Israel bombed these places. The number actually of the martyrs, the Palestinian martyrs, until this moment has reached 9,500 people, over 70% of them being children and women, and the number of wounded people exceeded 30,000 people. And there are reports from families. About 2,000 people are missing and under rubble in Gaza. And with more than half of these people that are missing are children, actually. Today, more than 32,000 residential units have completely destroyed in Gaza. And of course, all these numbers are likely to increase with each passing moment of continued aggression. Actually, Israel also continued to impose collective punishment on the people of Gaza by preventing the entry of food and water and medicine and fuel. This is in addition to the relentless bombardment creates a real or humanitarian catastrophe there. People in Gaza are really suffering from, they are about to suffer from a famine due to food shortages, and they are forced to drink polluted water there. And Israel actually intentionally in doing this, the occupying army yesterday targeted the solar panels in the city of Gaza, which are the only source of electricity for the population there. And also they shelled a public water tank that supplies several neighborhoods in the Gaza Strip. Also, the health system in Gaza is in the verge of collapse. Hospitals and the health centers actually are full of wounded and corpses, and they working beyond their capacity. And there is a severe shortage of the medication, and many of the surgeries are performed without anesthesia, actually. And the fuel shortage caused tens of hospitals and health centers to go out of work, including the Turkish Friendship Hospital, which is the only hospital for cancer patients in Gaza Strip. This resulted in the death of 4 cancer patients 2 days ago, and the number is likely to increase by the continuous refusal of Israel allowing the fuel to enter Gaza and to enter the hospitals. Also, the day before yesterday, one of the largest hospitals in Gaza announced that the main electricity generator had stopped working, and because of that, some of its departments stopped working in that hospital. Actually, this is only a small part of the picture in Gaza now, and I think that describing the extent of the crimes that is happening there is and the amount of misery and oppression that people are experiencing there falls beyond the words. Israel also, it's not only about Gaza Strip. Israel now also using the aggression in Gaza to escalate daily crimes against Palestinians in West Bank and even in territories of 48. I mean, against the Palestinians in Israel. So the occupation continues to impose complete closure and set up barriers between the cities in West Bank, and this making the movement between these cities nearly impossible and fraught with many risks, especially in the light of the orders given to the army that facilitate the firing of live ammunition at Palestinians. Since the October 7th, occupation forces have killed more than 143 Palestinians in West Bank. Also in West Bank, there are unprecedented daily cases of arrests and pursuit of Palestinians. The number of arrests since the October 7th reaching 2,000 detainees, including hundreds of administrative detention cases, again, which is detention without any charge. Also, in addition to this, to these arrests, Israel arrests for 1 month 7,000 Palestinian workers from Gaza who were working in Israel on the October 7th. And during this month, these workers were subjected to most horrendous forms of torture and humiliation, and their money were stolen from the Israeli armies. Also today, there is unprecedented increase in settler crimes against Palestinians, including an increase in fatal shooting against Palestinians. Since October 7th, 8 Palestinians have been killed by settlers. And by the way, since the beginning of this year, 29 Palestinians have been killed also by settlers. Also, the Palestinian citizens of Israel in Israel faced today unprecedented oppression, especially in the last month, including political persecution, job termination, and exclusion from the educational institutions, and their freedom, including their right to express solidarity with their people in West Bank or Gaza, have been curtailed. There also have been numerous arrests for the Palestinians inside Israel for minor charges, including only posting Facebook posts, with 250 cases of arrests just only for writing Quran verses on Facebook. Actually, it's really very difficult to enumerate the crimes of occupation, whether in Gaza Strip or in West Bank, or even against the Palestinian in Israel. But I hope I have been able to convey part of the picture there in Palestine. I know that I'm running out of time. Just to conclude and to answer the question I was asked, I want to say that the immediate demand of the Palestinian people today is to stop the aggression and the genocide immediately now, and also to open the Karm Abu Salim and Erez crossing to allow the supplies of fuel, food, water, and medicine to enter Gaza. But I want also to emphasize that this immediate demand must also not make us lose sight of the basic demand of the Palestinians, which is ending the occupation and also guaranteeing their rights, especially the right of return for the Palestinian refugees. Actually, I want to emphasize that international solidarity and the international popular movements are of great importance today. And also they can play a crucial role of achieving these two demands for Palestinian. So I think today, more than any day before. We are in real need for international solidarity. I want to stop here. I hope I didn't take much time.
Thank you, Arwa, for giving us those insights into the extent of the crimes of the Zionist entity and also the political background, the political context, and Israel's daily crimes that frame the events since October 7. Our next speaker, who I'll introduce, is Vijay Prashad. So Vijay is a historian, editor, and journalist. He's a writing fellow and chief correspondent at Globetrotter, an editor of Left Word Books, and the director of the Tricontinental Institute for Social Research. He also, a few hours ago, spoke at, I believe, the largest Palestinian solidarity rally in the history of the US. So I'll hand over straight to you, Vijay. Thanks.
Well, it's 1:30 in the morning, and I have a flight tomorrow. So I wonder if I'm going to be picked up at the airport for abusing Joe Biden and calling him a war criminal. So we'll see. This might be the last time you see me, and so be it. Look, Arwa has painted the picture, and now it comes for us to draw some conclusions from that picture. Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, it was in Amman, Jordan, where he met with the foreign ministers of several Arab countries, of course, Jordan, Egypt, and others. Interestingly, again, the Americans were trying to sell the idea of the humanitarian pause, which is a ridiculous idea, because what humanitarian pause means is let's stop the bombing for 24 hours, get some aid to the people stuck in Gaza City, for instance. And then after we've given them their packet of sandwiches and their bottle of water, let's start bombing them again. It's unimaginable that sane people believe that these euphemisms are in fact judicious, that people can actually walk around talking about things like a humanitarian pause, as if this is a real thing and not a made-up advertising branding term for allowing the United States and Israel to appear liberal while they are being savages. They're refusing to use the term ceasefire because they think that, as James Kirby, the spokesperson for the US National Security Agency said, National Security Council said, there are no red lines. Israel can do whatever it wants. So you say there's a humanitarian pause merely to say United States is actually, a well-meaning country. They don't want to kill civilians, but you have to. You'll remember, of course, that this is the United States that prosecuted the illegal war against Iraq. Also, only 6 years ago, under cover of complete blanket from the media, went in and bombed Mosul to get rid of ISIS. People have forgotten this. 2017, 11,000 civilians were killed. Do you remember this? 11,000 civilians killed in the so-called retaking of Mosul. 11,000. I mean, who cares about Iraqis? Million or so killed maybe in the course of the whole war, 2003 onwards. 11,000. I mean, for God's sake, you're not even near that in Ukraine. And this was an operation conducted over some weeks. And because I covered the war in Iraq, in Mosul, people were able to run out of their homes, literally run out and run into the countryside and hide from the bombs. In Gaza City, there is no countryside to run into because the Israeli Merkava tanks have surrounded the city. They came in from the north, Beit Jalon, and they came in down Saladin Street, which cuts north and south Gaza. There's no way the civilians of Jabalia camp could go anywhere. They're just being pummeled. And then the Yanks come in and say humanitarian pause. And I bet you the miserable government in Australia, which, abstained from the vote calling for a ceasefire, that same miserable ruling class, remember them in 2016, miserable Australian ruling class that refused to condemn settlements. After all, Australia has a history of being a settler colonial country. How would you expect a country that hasn't come to terms with its own wretched history? Why would it not identify with the settler colonials in Israel? Why would the United States, another wretched country built on settler colonialism, on slavery and so on, obviously they will come and identify with the Israelis on this. So there is Antony Blinken in Amman and the Jordanian foreign minister, ordinary guy, there's nothing special, about him. He's a foreign minister of a monarchy. I run into people like this. Ayman Safadi. Ayman Safadi says in the presence of Blinken, this madness must stop. He uses the word madness. Earlier, the Queen of Jordan, Queen Rania, gave a fantastic interview. She herself being Palestinian, gave a fantastic interview to Christian Amanpour, who is a spokesperson for the Israelis, despite having Iranian heritage, is a complete voice of America, And here's Christian Amanpour attempting to hector Queen Rania about the situation. Condemn, do you condemn, how they do this. And Queen Rania turns around and says, condemn what? What about condemning the occupation? What about condemning the dispossession? What about the Nakba? Where is your condemnation? I mean, it's a glorious moment. Million people on the streets of Amman. King Abdullah II sitting in his palace. His foreign minister, Ayman Safadi, goes to Blinken and says, madness must stop. And all the Yanks can turn around and say is humanitarian pause, which is meaningless. It's blah, 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 blah. It's not serious. And in fact, my friends, that's what's been happening. There's a lot of blah, 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 blah. Let's pick up on what Arwa just said. Look, Blinken goes to Amman. It's 4 weeks into this slaughter, this genocidal slaughter. And he's talking about the two-state solution. Mr. Blinken, your government, the ruling class of the United States, has made sure that the Oslo Accords, two-state solution, died the day it was signed. In Oslo, there's a provision that the three parts of the occupied Palestinian territory, and there are three parts, West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza. In Oslo, there's a provision called safe passage. Palestinians are supposed to move freely between these three zones of the OPT, occupied Palestinian territory. Nobody ever allowed safe passage. They built an apartheid wall around West Bank. They prevented people from East Jerusalem to move into the West Bank. And people between Gaza and the West Bank were simply not allowed free transit. That was a key anchor of Oslo, completely forgotten. Then the settlements. Firstly, East Jerusalem is being completely absorbed with violence. And then the West Bank, they start building settlements. This goes back to 1977, in fact, predating Oslo by 15 years, when Ariel Sharon, the great general of the Israeli military, is given the Ministry of Agriculture in the Likud government of 77. is not a farmer. Sharon was not there to grow oranges and so on. Sharon was there for the settlement policy. Under cover of agriculture, they started building settlements in what they call Judea and Samaria. 15 years before Oslo, they already had the settlement policy. And that's what they did. They annulled the two-state solution by eating into area ABC. I mean, what's the point of ABC when all of ABC is yours and you treat it as yours? Then no actual sovereignty to the Palestinian Authority. Anytime the Israelis wanted, they entered the West Bank, picked up anybody. And in fact, they arrested almost the entire leadership of the left political parties, PFLP, DFLP, Palestinian People's Party, whoever they wanted, they would come in, raid, take them away. At one time, we used to say the Politburo of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine is in an Israeli jail. Meanwhile, in Gaza, they suffocated that place after the people of Gaza refused to vote for the preferred candidate. When they voted for Hamas, they have been punished since 2005 for voting for Hamas. This is the punishment meted out to the 2.3 million people in Gaza. So the two-state solution, which Blinken was talking about in Amman, is a joke. And Arwa has just shown you that the settlement policy, the utter disregard for Palestinian dignity and so on, what two-state? It's gone. It's not possible. Where will you build this Palestinian state today after the Israelis have taken everything, after the Israeli society has transited rightward in such a racist way that they will not permit a two-state? Then idealistic people say one state. But a one state with democratic, secular rights is not viable. It's not possible. Why? The Israeli ruling class is not going to permit it. As it is, 21% of the Israeli population are Palestinians. They don't have full rights inside Israel. Look, demographically, just look at the numbers. If you are a far right-wing Israeli, and increasingly Israeli society is becoming far right-wing, if you absorbed all the Palestinians, the Israeli Jewish population is a minority. So because they have an ethno-nationalist, racist concept of the state, it's a Jewish state, any Jew around the world can come and live in Israel. But no Palestinian is allowed to exercise the right to return, enshrined in Resolution 194. So as long as this ruling class with its ethno-nationalist fantasy continues to exist in Israel, there is no one state. That's merely a demand in the air. Forget Netanyahu. Benny Gantz will not accept it. The so-called liberals in Israel will not accept a one state. So that's just a demand. It has no legs in Israeli society. My view is the Israelis are committed to a third alternative, which is the three-state solution. And that's what is playing out in Gaza and in the West Bank. And of course, East Jerusalem, which they've already substantially annexed. What is the three-state solution? It's the three states of Lebanon, Jordan, and Egypt. They want the bulldozers to just push all the Palestinians out of Gaza into Egypt, push all the Palestinians across the Jordan River into Jordan, and then some of them, if they want, can go to Lebanon. This is a violation of all UN resolutions since 1948 that have to do with Palestine. This is a scofflaw country. Okay, it's not a serious country. The country of Israel is in an annexationist mood right now. And which is why they don't care how many Palestinians they kill. Right now, they want to put pressure on Egypt, saying open Rafah and take all the Palestinians. Now you can imagine, I have friends in Gaza. Many of them don't want to cross. They understand it's the only way to survive. But they also understand if they cross, they will never be allowed back in. And so they are willing to sit there while the bombs rain down. This is the viciousness of the Israeli ruling class right now, back to the hilt by the United States government. 66% of the US population is in favor of a ceasefire. The government doesn't care. It's as if you are able to build a momentum in Australia through all the protests, and the government just disregards you. It's a Five Eyes country. Australia, New Zealand, Canada, all the settler colonial white countries are in an intelligence network, Five Eyes. It's actually Five Eyes plus one. The plus one is Israel. These countries stick together. The reason it's so important to build the movement you're building in Australia, and hopefully someday there'll be a movement like this in New Zealand, is we have to go under the Five Eyes. We have to take society away from them. These are not democratic people. They don't care about votes. They don't care about arguments of legality. They care about power. They don't care how many people they killed. Antony Blinken and company, and I'm going to end with this, talk about humanitarian aid. What is the character of humanitarian aid? They talk about trucks entering Rafah. So far, in the last 4 weeks, the total number of trucks that have entered through Rafah is the total number of trucks that used to enter per day. Because Gaza requires a lifeline. It cannot feed itself. For the 4 weeks, you would have had 28 times the number of trucks entering as have entered. This is not humanitarian aid. The trucks are sitting at Rafah, unable to enter. Then the Israelis and the Yanks come up with an idea. Let's build a sea corridor. Okay, interesting idea. Let aid go to Cyprus, where the Israelis will inspect it, and then let it come by boat to Gaza. Israelis even mentioned the name of a port just outside Gaza City, where the boats could come in. And here's the thing. While the Israelis were talking about all this, guess what they did? They're talking big about a sea corridor. That's the port we're going to use. And then they bomb the port. That's these people. They're not serious. You can't confront them with legalities. You have to confront them with power. You have to build power. You have to make sure your government understands that it is colluding with criminality. Thanks.
Thank you, Vijay. I think on that note, we should go straight to the final speaker, who is Max Lane. So Max is has been a socialist activist since 1981. Throughout the 1990s, Max was deeply involved in the solidarity movement with the East Timorese struggle for independence and for its own state. He is a founding member of the Red Ant Collective, and he's also a fellow of the Tricontinental Institute for Social Research. Max. You're on mute.
As usual, I'm on mute. I want to start by, reaffirming the condemnation that Arwa and Vijay have explained about the crimes against humanity that are being carried out in Gaza at the moment. And there's no need for me to go through all that in detail. That's been already explained in a quite vivid and effective way. But I just want to say that for me, thinking of and reading about what's happening in Gaza at the moment, the particular of the many crimes, the particular crime that sort of brings home the savagery and brutality of what the Israeli state is doing is that they've bombed to death 5,000 children. They've bombed to death 5,000 children, and more than that of the indigenous people outside of that. Just seems to be to do that consciously and systematically is just can only be classified as a crime against humanity. And of course, when you look at the the positions taken by the Western imperialist governments, including the government of Australia, for example, they can't even bring themselves to vote in favour of a ceasefire. They have to abstain. They can't even bring themselves to that, even though everyone, almost everyone now on their television sets or on their social media feeds can see the evidence of this savagery and brutality almost 24 hours a day if you want to tune into it. But I want to use my few minutes basically to look at the Australian government policy, because the way that policy is implemented, and in particular the way it's explained, I think sets some parameters for how the solidarity movement in Australia must respond in countering it. And I think there's two elements, or two stated elements of the Australian government position. One is in relation to the immediate situation of the horror that's taking place in Gaza now. Initially, of course, the immediate response of the Australian government and the opposition parties, the conservative opposition party in Australia, was to state Israel has Hamas has carried out a horror, a terror attack. Israel has the right to self-defense. Full stop. That's their mantra that they always come up with. But then people could see on their social media feeds and on TV the extent of the savagery, and at the same time the demonstrations started to take place in Australia. Last weekend, 30,000 plus in Melbourne. Today, apparently the same in Melbourne. Yesterday, thousands in Sydney, and lots of small actions everywhere, where small groups of people protesting outside a politician's office, trade unionists organising their groups to take up this issue as well. So then the Australian government modifies how it talks about what's happened. The Israelis have the right to self-defense, but then the Australian Foreign Minister and the Australian Prime Minister say Australians have the right to self-defense, but it matters how they do it. In other words, yes, they can defend themselves, but they shouldn't contravene the rules of law, etc. They say this while at the same time the United Nations abstaining from actually voting in favour of this brutality, the way they are doing it. They abstain from voting, calling for Israeli to stop that. But we have to ask, what's behind all this savagery or brutality? Arwa has explained a lot of it, and I'm very glad that this her presentation was recorded so that we can spread that around even more. But we have to ask, if there's you now see basically in practice what the Israelis are doing. They've basically enforced, in the worst possible sense, the law of the jungle. How many times has the United Nations and the International Courts and so on said again and again and again that what Israel has done is illegal? You do that for decades. What you now have is a situation where law of any kind doesn't really operate. Arwa explained how many thousands of Palestinians arrested without trial in Israel. What's legal about snipers shooting children? So you can forget any way of looking at this problem. Or all the parties involved should abide by the law. Israel has imposed a situation of lawlessness in Palestine, Israel and Palestine. And why is this? Because I think, as both Vijay and Arwa has outlined, the Israel project probably always was, but now is more and more deeply exposed as a project of expansion. When the Australian government says Israel has the right of self-defense, it does not have the right to self-defense if it's an occupying power expanding the territory it's taking of others. That's not any sense of defense. That's aggression and expansion. And that expansion in this context means dispossession by force. and expulsion by force. So you're imposing a completely illegal. Forget talking about law. What we're talking about now. And I think the way we have to more and more conceive of what's required. The way we have to conceive what's required is that Israel has to be defeated. It has to be defeated. Its project of conquest and expansion has to be defeated. I think it can be defeated, and of course, the first crucial element in defeating this project is manifested in the resistance of the Palestinians themselves, the intifadas, all of the resistance right up until this moment. That's the key single element. But because of the range of forces against them, and because Israel itself is in many ways such a fake artificial state, completely dependent on the billions of dollars from the US, Israel has received more aid from the US during the course of its existence than any other country in the world. It will probably collapse for that aid. So in this context, I think the international solidarity movement is going to have to play a very crucial role. The resistance in Palestine itself needs to be backed up by international solidarity so the Israeli project is defeated. Defeat is the word that we have to use. Now, in the Australian context, that means we have to be, and probably, in the US also, we have to, what we're demanding, what we want is a complete reversal of US policy, a complete reversal of Australian policy. We're not asked what we want, what's objectively manifested in what we want is not a 30 degrees change or a 40 degrees change. We want a complete reversal in Australian government and US government policy. Of course, the main concrete demand, or one of the main concrete demands in the US, will be ending that billions of dollars of aid to Israel. That's one key component. Now, what about in Australia? Australia does have some business connections. There was discussions of military collaboration on cyber projects. Australia has a defense attaché in Israel. But I think in the end, we have to come back to the second part of Australian policy. The first one is, it's right of self-defense, but please do it in a genteel way, as if that's a credible plea. And the second component is, if you go to the Australian Department of Defence website, they state what their policy is. First sentence: Australia does not recognise a Palestinian state. Full stop. Second sentence: we are committed to a two-state solution in which Israel and a future Palestinian state coexist in peace and security, blah, blah, blah. So you think about this, well, they're willing to recognize a future Palestinian state because they already recognize the Israeli state. They're willing to recognize the future one, but all the concrete actions of the Western governments strengthen the current Israel project of one state, Greater Israel. You can't, it's just blah, blah, blah to say we support two-state on the one hand, but in practice, back up the policies which are aimed at a single state under Israeli state and Israeli ruling class power. So in that context, I think probably we have two reasons in the Australian context, and maybe in other imperialist countries too, the same thing applies. Two reasons to demand no more Israeli embassy in Australia. First, shouldn't have representation of a state that carries out war crimes on such a visible, transparent scale as is happening now. Bombing to death 5,000 children in a very short period of time. The second reason is if you're unable to recognize the Palestinian state, there should be no recognition of Israeli state, the occupier, the colonizer, the expansion. No Israeli embassy in Australia, sever relations, and move towards recognition of a Palestinian state. That in and of itself is not going to change dramatically the situation on the ground, but a movement in the imperialist countries with those demands could. But as I said, it's a demand to reverse policy, not to change policy a little bit, not to just increase by another $10 million or $20 million humanitarian aid that may or may not actually get distributed. Not a demand to change the wording, express sorry or sentiments, but it's a demand to reverse policy. Now, to win the victory of reversing policy, we have to be honest to ourselves here. The movement that has developed is not big enough yet. It's not big enough. We have to grow. So I think that, some specific concrete demands around the recognition of Israel question, as well as the very immediate one of stopping the bombing, stopping the siege. They have to be tied together. And then the other message we have to get out is we have to grow. Big demonstrations in and of themselves, if they're not sustained and don't grow into a political movement, will be ignored. So, well, is there some magic formula that I know of that can achieve that? No, but one message we have to get out is that every single person who goes to a demonstration, every single person who supports a demonstration, even though they're not able to get to it because of their situation, we all have to become not simply demonstrators, but propagandists and organizers ourselves. Because there are no existing large organizations that are going to take up this issue. The movement has to build itself through all of us, through either groups that we're involved in or neighborhoods or whatever, not only to go to demonstrations, but to become propagandists. There's plenty of stuff in Australia. There's plenty of good, the Palestinian solidarity groups, there's various of them, all have good data on websites which people can download and use for explanation for propaganda. And we have to become organizers. So it's very good in the Australian context to see small groups doing their own demonstrations outside politicians' office. But we have to grow. We have to get our message across. We have to give the history that Arwa outlined get that out to the beyond the small left reserve. And I can tell you, so my final comment, I can tell you again, I'm 72 years old. So I had my education on Palestine in the early 60s via the Hollywood movie Exodus, starring Paul Newman, who in the message of that Hollywood movie, blockbuster movie, was that all that the people going to Palestine to establish Israel to do wanted to set up, nice socialist kibbutz and walk together with the good Arabs, despite the fact that the bad Arabs were against them. That sentiment is still what's widely spread in Australian society, passed through the generations. What the Israelis are doing now, so visibly, is helping break that down. But that visibility of what the Israelis are doing is not going to be enough by itself. We have to encourage the movement and do what we can ourselves to turn this movement not only into a movement of mobilization of protests, but a movement of mobilizing real alternative explanations, the real explanations of the history, the context, as Arwa said, and what the solutions are. What are the solutions? 10 million Palestinians, including those in refugees, and the few million who are non-Palestinian members of Israeli society. What is the exact solution? Well, for me, whatever the exact solution is, there's only one people who have the right to decide it and formulate it: the Palestinian nation. And for the Palestinian nation to be able to win what its own perspectives are, have them implemented, Israel must be defeated. And I think that's the message we have to get out. We don't simply want to protest against Israel. The Israel state has to be defeated. And I think in the current context, in the immediate term, I don't know enough about Middle Eastern politics to know what the different Arab states themselves will end up doing. But in the immediate term, the ongoing, incredibly courageous resistance of the Palestinians themselves in Gaza and the West Bank, but also the international solidarity movement around the world, but especially in the imperialist countries, really has to be helped to grow. So I stop there.
Thank you, Max. And so I apologize, Corin's having some technical issues on my end. So we have 20 more minutes left in the forum, so we should go straight into the Q&A session. So as I mentioned at the start, the way that we'll run it is you can put the questions into the the messaging, the text thing, and I'll read them out to the panelists. I also have to apologize that because I'm having technical issues, I got kicked out of the meeting, and whoever put questions in earlier, I can't see them, so maybe just put them back in if you've got them handy. So the first question that we have is about the shift in public opinion. And so the question asks that it seems that there has been a shift in public opinion due to the footage that has been emerging, particularly compared to the almost complete media control during the Iraq wars. Popular opinion tends to shift. Popular opinion tends to shift when people see at least some of the evidence. But I'm just trying to guess based on what I see, as partly dictated by social media algorithms. So I guess the question for the panel is, I think firstly, what is the nature of the shift that has been observed, and also what is the causes of this shift in public opinion? So that's one question. I think since we don't have a whole lot of time, so I'll add this question on as well before handing over. So how do we connect the struggle for Palestinian solidarity with the broader struggle in Australia against the US alliance and Western imperialism's war drive against Russia and China? I think probably two questions for now is probably enough. So Arwa, are you there?
Yes, I'm there.
Hi. So did you want to answer either of those questions?
Yeah, actually, I want to start from the least that I know the answer regarding the relationship between what is happening in Gaza and the war against China and Russia. Actually, I don't have clear analysis for this question, but I believe that the United States today is exploiting the Israeli aggression to strengthen its position in the Middle East. And I think this may explain the transfer of some of the American defenses to the region. So I believe that this attempt of reinforcing the position of United States in the Middle East comes also within the framework of responding of the increasing or rising of the position of China position in the region. So I think there is a kind of relation between what is happening in Palestine and what's happening in Russia and Ukraine war. And I think United States and Israel, which is the how to say the police for United States in the region, they have interest, imperialist interest in the region, and any let's say fight against these interests, any victory against these interests in one region actually is a victory for the people struggle and for the working class struggle, whether in United States or Australia. I want to answer the question that's directly also related to the Palestinian Authority. Actually, the role of the Palestinian Authority, unfortunately, in this war was very, very modest and was limited to some, let's say, dubious effort that really fell short of what is happening in Gaza and what is happening in Palestine. And today there is overwhelming Palestinian popular anger at the role of the Palestinian Authority. And I believe that recent aggression or recent situation in Gaza will put the Palestinian Authority in a difficult position regarding whether it is really capable of leading the Palestinian people and can be representative of the Palestinian people. And the Palestinian Authority actually is trying to make a balance between the popular demands, the Palestinian popular demands, and with the international demands, including actually the American and Israeli demands that requires from the Palestinian Authority to tighten its control over the West Bank. And I believe that the Palestinian Authority will pay the price of this kind of balance, because the Palestinian people now will not be tolerant with this kind of balance or biased against what's happening of their people. So this is my answer regarding this question. And I think there is direct question about the Palestinian People's Party and its relation with Mahmoud Abbas. Actually, the Palestinian People's Party is part of the PLO, which is the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and we have various relations with the different Palestinians parties and fractions, including Fatah, which is headed by Mahmoud Abbas. We as Palestinian Party was part of the last Palestinian government, but we withdraw from that government due the lack of commitment to implementing the agreement upon which we entered the government. And most of this agreement was concerning social issues, including approval of social security law in Palestine, because the Palestinian People Party believed that enhancing the social steadiness of the Palestinian people is essential and very important to enhancing the Palestinians' ability to resist and achieving the liberation and ending the liberation and ending the occupation. And also there was unacceptable aggressions, let's say, of freedoms of expression in the West Bank, and the most recent was the killing of one of the Palestinian activists, Nizar Banat, and due of that, especially that action, the Palestinian People's Party actually withdraw or left the government. So this is actually our relation with Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority.
Thank you. Vijay?
Actually, I just glanced at the chat and I was very happy to see the question from Syed Farid Alatas. One reason, of course, is that I'm just reading his father's book about corruption. And so, Farid, it's great to see you. You know, I'm a friend of your sister as well, Mastura. And, well, the book on corruption is a terrific study. It's underappreciated, I think, in my opinion. And Farid himself had put together, I think, the second edition. The question of Hamas is, of course, bedeviling. And, you know, it's always raised, you know, do we have to condemn Hamas? So let's take this sequentially, I think. The first point is that, you know, it's not that Palestinian politics hasn't attempted, let's say, a nonviolent strategy. In 2019, Ahmad Abu Artema and other friends in Gaza, by the way, Ahmad has just lost 5 members of his family. Himself, I don't know if he'll survive the attack that was on him. Ahmad was born in 1984. He was 3 years old at the first Intifada. But he decided with a group of friends and some of the factions to conduct the Great March of Return in 2019, where they proceeded to walk non-violently to the perimeter fence. And the Israelis just sniped them. They killed 200 people, I think, in a matter of a few days. The major, not living memory, but just yesterday, 2019, the Great March of Return was an interesting experiment for the people of Gaza. They tried a non-violent approach. They were brutally killed. Because, in fact, what it showed was the occupation is not going to permit non-violent protest. I've been in several non-violent protests, as Arwa has, in the West Bank. You know, been at marches, marching towards the apartheid wall. And, you know, the occupation troops just attack you, you know. They fire tear gas. They have live fire. People get shot. They just don't tolerate any politics. In fact, the situation vis-a-vis the Palestinians from the occupation is of politicide. You know, prior to genocide, they want to kill politics. They want the Palestinians to have no politics. So what does one do? You are an occupied people. United Nations has said occupied people have a right to resist. In fact, Israel does not have a right to defend itself. This is a failure of understanding. Israel is an occupying power. Now, if Egypt attacked Israel, it could defend itself. Those are 2 UN member states. Palestine is not a country. It is an occupied territory. And when you occupy people, you have obligations and rights towards the people. Israel has violated all its obligations and has not provided dignity, you know, collective punishment, imprisonment of political dissidents, and so on. I mean, there's a laundry list. And the people who are occupied actually have a right to resist. This is enshrined in about, at least by my count, 6 or 7 UN resolutions provide this, including the Great Declaration on the colonial question in 1960, where the United Nations resolution says the process is, by the way, one of them was poetic resolution. The process of liberation is irresistible and irreversible. That's the UN resolution. So Hamas appears, interestingly, in 1987, during the first Intifada, I well remember the appearance of Hamas. Some years ago, I interviewed Khalid Mishal of Hamas, and he said to me, "You people outside are crazy if you think Hamas is a dangerous force. We represent the will of the people as much as we can." And he said, there are actually currents to our right, which are genuinely terrifying, even to us. He was like, this is where Palestinian anger is. You see, occupied people, if you read the first chapter of Frantz Fanon's Wretched of the Earth called Concerning Violence, an occupied people are a people who are angry. An occupied people are a people who are angry because of the status of the occupation, the structure of the occupation. An occupied people cannot be expected to be liberals. Liberalism is the facade of, in a sense, the privileged. I was once giving a talk in Ramallah at the Edward Said Hall, and it was a talk about strategy and tactics and all the things that us Marxists talk about. The hall was filled with lots of kids, young kids, boys and girls from the camps, refugee camps. After I finished the talk, these kids surrounded me. And the guy who was with me, he was a tall, very pleasant person. He was like, I think we should leave because these kids are upset with you. Well, they were not upset with me. All they said to me was that everything you're saying makes sense to us, but we don't have the time for this. We have to go and attack them now. They just said, we don't need strategy. We need anger. And I was saying to them, no, listen, you'll get killed. You need a strategy. I don't want to see your precious life, disappear. I don't want you to run at an Israeli checkpoint with a knife, which is what a lot of kids had been doing. Don't do that. You'll all get killed. We need to build a movement. They were like, no, friend, you don't get it. We live in the structure of colonialism. There's no time for all this. We're angry. We're desperate. We're frustrated. So in that sense, Farid, Hamas is actually a representative of the emotions of people in Palestine, particularly in Gaza, which is an encaged area. I've been to Gaza 3-4 times, maybe more. One thing I'll say about Gaza, friends, is that I've never felt scared there. I never felt like I'll get robbed, my phone will be stolen, nothing. Jabalia is one of the poorest places I've been to, and I was born and brought up in Calcutta in India, which is like famously a poor place. But I never felt fear of theft or anything. The great sense of the refugee mentality is at work there. They are in a fight. It's a political thing. It's not petty criminality. The anger that people have is palpable. It's real. And Hamas channels that. Hamas is a conduit for the structure of colonialism. Now, I have my own personal problems with a front like Hamas. I'm not a religious person. But just bear this in mind. Hamas is an acronym for the Islamic resistance movement. It's the resistance part of it that appeals to a wide range of people, not just in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. They may not join Hamas. They may not be party to the Islamic side of the name, but the resistance side, Hamas captures something. So, look, whatever one says, I say that right now what we are feeling is literally what Fanon wrote about in Wretched of the Earth. It's literally that. And it's well worth reading that. And when people ask me, why don't you condemn Hamas? I respond to them as the only way I can is, when have you condemned the occupation? Why don't we start with you? Because the occupation starts in 1948. Hamas only starts in 87. That means you have an obligation to go before me. Before I condemn Hamas, you condemn the occupation, because your occupation is older than Hamas. And Hamas can disappear tomorrow. Your problem is not with Hamas. Your problem is with the Palestinians. When you say Hamas, you mean the Palestinians. It's a convenient way of being, in a way, anti-Palestinian. So, I understand and feel for people when they, say, oh my God, the images, families, and so on. You know, when you're living right next to an occupied area like Gaza, which is a pressure cooker, I mean, I'm sorry to say, that's where you're living. That's your neighborhood. You know, I'm not saying people deserved it or anything, but that is the neighborhood. People are angry. And, you know, the population of Israel has done nothing over the last 20 years to ameliorate the situation. In fact, they've gone rightward. And that's disturbing for them. Their society is toxic. You know, one of the great lessons of the anti-colonial writers is colonialism hurts both the colonized and the colonizer. The colonizer loses their humanity in being colonizers. They are half human, vicious in their behavior. When you have young soldiers in military duty banging down doors, pushing children around, you know, then they have to come to India to smoke ganja and get over their military service. So they go to, you know, Dharamshala, Goa, they lie on the beach and cry because those Israeli troops know what they've done is grotesque. Colonialism takes away the humanity of the colonizer, sometimes more than the colonized. The colonized humanity is reaffirmed by resisting. It's really nice to see you, Farid, honestly.
I was wondering, can I also quickly ask the panel? It's already past. With the panelists, is there enough time for extend for, say, 15 minutes? I know you got to get a plane, Vijay. Is that okay? And Arwa, is that okay for you?
Looks like Nick's frozen. Max, did you want to take your turn to respond? Or Nick's back.
Yeah, muted, Max.
Just want to respond to the question that relates to potential for struggles in Australia, for example, with the AUKUS and Ukraine, Russia, etc., etc. I think there's two ways to look at it. One is, you know, to do analysis of the geopolitics and how these things might be interrelated as they evolve. But I think there's another way, perhaps more fundamental way to also assess this to answer this question. You know, in Palestine, as we all know, there's that horrible, despicable wall that the Israelis built to separate, stealing land in the process, to separate Palestinians from, keep them away from Israel. And on one side of the wall, and it's always, as it should with all people, disturb you when you see images on the Israeli side of the wall, people sitting in plazas at restaurants or bathing on the beach under the beach umbrellas, etc., etc. And then you see that and you see what the situation is on the other side of the wall: occupation, oppression, and misery. Well, I think in many respects that wall between Israel and Palestine, it's symbolic of a wall that actually divides the whole world. There's a wall set up of existing in various kinds, which separates, keeps apart the countries of the first world, the imperialist countries, and the population of the global south. In Australia, we have it in a very concrete form, in many forms. But one concrete form is the policy of Australian governments, both openly right-wing and disguised right-wing, the Labor Party, for example, of turning back boats when refugees come. You turn them back. Well, that's also definitely a kind of war. So there's this wall dividing the first world imperialist countries from the whole of the peoples of the global south. Behind this wall, of course, live the ruling classes of the imperialist countries, but also the working class. I think what's definitely required in the current period is for behind that wall, behind enemy lines, fifth column of progressives, humanists, socialists have to get stronger and stronger. The forces behind enemy lines need to get stronger. And you can't do that while the imperialists keep having success in ensuring people, working people, ordinary people in the first world lack empathy, can't solidarize, can't identify with the people of the global south. This momentum now of people being churned up by seeing the horrific images of savagery on the TV screen, if we must do as much as we can to transform that, deepen that. It's not simply enough to have a humanitarian response to the savagery. The wall has to be broken down. No more wall in Palestine, no more wall in the world. If the wall in Palestine can be broken down and a solution that's democratic for all concerned, but starting with the people whose homeland it is, the Palestinians, then that will also help break, that will be a contribution to building for a victory for solidarity with people on the other side of the war. Building power and understanding behind enemy lines is absolutely essential in the coming period, and transforming the current sense of injustice that ordinary people respond when they see what's happening in Palestine on their social media and on their TV, transforming that into a deeper political aware solidarity that can lay the basis for resistance behind enemy lines to all of the policies of the imperialist states, whether it's trying to contain China or agitate against whatever component of the non-imperialist world they feel the need to target at the moment. So that's how I think you can also do a geopolitical analysis. I think the question of power behind enemy lines, building of opposition force or a progressive force behind enemy lines is how we need it. Sometimes having strong fifth column, so to speak, behind enemy lines is what helps you defeat your opponent. I think it's an important contribution factor. Just one thing on the Hamas question. I don't know enough about it. I've read articles, I've read the Hamas Charter and so forth and so on. And more significantly, or more in the more immediate term, I've tried to read what's available about the October 7 action. And I don't really have a clear understanding myself of what actually happened. But I do know, or at least from what the Israeli Defense Force said, and I'm assuming that on this particular data, they're telling the truth. If anything, they're probably downgrading to. They say approximately 400 soldiers, Israeli soldiers, died. And that means, I presume, a lot more were wounded. Well, to my mind, an action that results in enemy soldiers dying on such a large scale must have been primarily a military action. I can't imagine it being some sort of action that's sort of deliberately, primarily focused on killing civilians. If that many, according to all accounts, Israeli soldiers are well trained and well armed. 400 killed. That must have been some firefight for that to happen. But then again, I don't know. It's so hard to tell what happens, what the detail of what happens in these events. In terms of general sentiments, I'm with you, Vijay, on that question. Roger, over and out.
Okay, since we have 5 minutes left, I was wondering if I could just pass over to Arwa and Vijay to give some final remarks to the. You're pointing to the chat actually, Vijay, on my screen.
That's Arwa.
Okay.
No, I just want to emphasize again that the international solidarity is really important. It's not only a rhetoric that it's important. I think the millions that we saw yesterday in streets played a very important role of stopping Israel from committing more crimes against Palestinians, and also these demonstrations and people who were in the streets show that the Western, especially the Western governments, are putting themselves in a position against to their people. So, and they are actually supporting Israel against the will of their people. I believe that international solidarity is not only a solidarity with the Palestinian people, it's actually an action that we as a human need to do, because the crimes actually that is happening in Gaza Strip is not acceptable for our humanity. Actually, it hurts our humanity. So if we want to defend our humanity, we need to take action against all these crimes that Israel actually committed. That's it. And thank you very much for this seminar.
Thank you. And I'd like to say on behalf of all of the organisers of this event, our sincere solidarity with you and sincere solidarity with the Palestinian resistance. Although the Australian government continues to back Israel, continues to back the apartheid regime, we saw yesterday in Melbourne at least 50,000 people on the streets. So what they're saying, what the imperialist ruling class in Australia is saying, does not represent the will of the people. And again, my sincere solidarity with you, comrade. And thank you so much for giving your time to us today. Thank you.